During 2023's PlayStation Showcase, we finally got a first look at Marvel Spider-Man 2 gameplay, and it was pretty beefy. We got combat, traversal, set pieces, and many more elements that, if you pay a closer attention, it shares many elements with the first and Miles Morales game, alongside some new additions and quality of life features. And as a massive fanboy of those games who went in depth regarding narrative and gameplay philosophies in these two videos, I feel like I have enough grasp and knowledge of the ins and outs of how those games are built to make some really cool and noteworthy points as we dissect Spider-Man's 2 gameplay in the following minutes. So sit back, relax, and let's have a look at how Insomniac is making the necessary adjustments and additions to deliver a one-of-a-kind experience later this year. As we work our way up, we'll first start with the smaller stuff regarding to the general tech and how Insomniac is taking advantage of the PS5 hardware that's easily noticeable at first sight, being the lighting, asset streaming, and visual density. After the gameplay showcase, there's been a lot of discussion about the game not looking as great as the reveal trailer, and if there's anything that we've learned from Puddlegate with the first game, it's not a matter of graphical downgrade, but more so about creative differences and artistic changes that you may or may not feel content with. In the case of this showcase, I think the main culprit can be attributed to the time of day the mission takes place, and how the lighting itself, while good, doesn't lend itself a visually striking. As a sucker for good lighting, that element alone can make or break the visual appeal of a game, and in the case of this gameplay showcase, alongside the compression of the stream, it does give the feeling that the game doesn't look as good, except if you watch the 4K version of YouTube, which is a much cleaner, and I implore you to go check it by the way. Personally, I don't dislike the lighting, but it feels a bit incoherent, as if the scenes look very muddy, especially during the chase sections. And I think if it took place in the afternoon, sometime around 2 to 3 PM, it would have looked much more appealing. Just a suggestion to the team. I also gotta preface that this is in development footage, and most of what we've seen will hopefully look much more improved when the full game comes out. Second, asset streaming. If you know anything about game development, then you should already know how this works. But if you don't, here's a quick breakdown. Specifically with open world games, the entire game world is never fully rendered, and to save space on memory, devs will come up with techniques and solutions to deload any assets not inside of the player, and any asset that is visible will usually have lower poly counts depending on the distance threshold established for performance sake, which is why you'll usually see it pop in more frequently in older games. As generations have advanced, so has the hardware and how fast it can render, and if you've played Spider-Man on a PS4, I'm pretty sure you must have encountered moments where if you swing too fast, the game will pause momentarily to give the system some time to load in higher quality assets. It's very jarring but needed sometimes. Right around the PS5 press release, there was this piece of footage that showcased the power difference between the PS4 stock HDD and PS5 stock SSD, and given the fast reading times of the SSD, the camera is moving at such a pace that the game never hitches or pauses to load anything new because of the said reading times. As we see in the gameplay footage for Spider-Man 2, this SSD benefit brings the addition of a wingsuit for both of our protagonists. You may be asking why now if games like Just Cause 3 and 4 managed to pull this off on the PS4, and to that, I'll say the major difference is that with the Just Cause games, most of the landmass is flat, and the streaming techniques used by Avalanche allows them to get away with it. Spider-Man, however, takes place in New York, a very dense city full of buildings, vehicles, and pedestrians, and while this could have been pulled off, seamlessness would have been impossible on a stock hard drive, because if we compare both swinging, which relies on pendulum physics, versus floating, which relies on a constant fixed speed, the latter makes the brunt of the work more difficult than the former. The SSD allows for more visual density to be present in the environments as well, as we can see in these screenshots where you can see more foliage and vehicles, especially in longer distances, as well as in this set piece where you can see so many elements on screen with the cranes and the boats on site, giving it a full and lived-in space feel. Spider-Man PS4's approach to web swinging, being based on real-world pendulum physics, proved to be the best approach Insomniac took, and even though it lacks an element of skill to be mastered, it allows everyone to have fun with the system. On Miles Morales, they somehow managed to refine this swinging, making it more tight to control in general swinging, especially in tight turns, and in Spider-Man 2, at first it is hard to tell without playing it, but a new visual element I noticed is that the camera will now dynamically tilt depending on which direction you'll pull your character. This addition could have stemmed from the wingsuit, as the camera will behave the same in turns. Mechanically, there's Super Slingshot, which looks to launch you further than Point Boost could in the first two games, and we have the SSD to thank for that. As discussed, we have a wingsuit which helps bring more dynamism to traversal, where swinging is no longer the only tool to do so for further distances, as well as wind tunnels, which are most likely handcrafted to be set in specific locations of the map. The swinging speed has also been increased as confirmed in a PS blog about the game, and other than that, the core general swinging seems to remain the same, which is not a bad thing as it is already perfect in those games. As obvious, set pieces remain as one of the most important aspects of this game when it comes to spectacle, but I've noticed that they have two types of frameworks when it comes to how they're structured. Framework A, where player autonomy is much more broad, and you can see them in the set pieces, you actually have full control of your character and higher chances of failure, with an example being the car chases in the previous games, but this time on a larger scale. And Framework B, where much of your autonomy is stripped, the camera angle is locked, and your movement is usually locked to either the horizontal or vertical axis. Nothing bad with it, as it allows the devs to frame intended action sequences and their intensity. And off the top of my head, the one set piece that uses this framework, or both, is the Rhino chase in Miles Morales. Not much to add here, but I thought it was an interesting observation. Also, when Miles rescues the guy fishing, he gets his fish, which automatically makes him the best Spidey. Moving on. Combat seems to remain relatively the same, and if you want an in-depth breakdown, I suggest watching my video where I dissect the combat design and philosophy of both Spider-Man PS4 and Miles Morales. This doesn't mean that combat has remained untouched, however, as we can see some obvious quality of life features that I'm pleased with. First is the gadgets. Now it seems that the gadgets wheel has been ditched. As you can see in the HUD, we have two types of alt abilities, with Peter L1 housing his Venom abilities and R1 housing his gadgets, and with Miles housing both his bioelectric powers and gadgets. I really like this addition because not only does it make sense now that Peter and Miles both have two types of abilities they can make use of, but reducing the gadget amount from 8 to 4 helps to simplify and speed up their usage during combat, instead of having to open the wheel every time we need to make a change. Or, subsequently, the 8 gadgets may not be gone, but both L1 and R1 could act as shortcuts, where we set our favorite types of powers and gadgets and use them inconsequently. Just in general, having shortcuts helps to simplify needless complexity, which is always a plus. Gadget cooldowns seem to be much quicker, as we can see in this self section, after Miles using a web grabber, instantly refreshing in less than 2 seconds, which could very much be a gadget upgrade, or just simply a difference of cooldowns inside and outside combat. When it comes to the Venom abilities themselves, they are really well designed and serve a ton of purpose that balances flashiness and usefulness. For example, the ability on the right allows you to push enemies just like impact webs. The one on top launches enemy in the air in a more stylish way. The one down where you can slam enemies to the ground. And they seem to be the types of abilities you can upgrade for extra advantages like having more enemies you can take down, just like the gadgets in the previous 2 games. Mechanically, there's a new parry system according to the PS blog, and while it doesn't get into too much detail, just by looking at it we can deduce that you can both parry and perfect parry. And if you perfect parry, you can also counterattack, which serves the risk and reward balance pretty well. When it comes to Miles, there's an interesting separation of powers, with the ones on top and left labeled in blue, and the right and down labeled in orange. If you remember, in Spider-Man Miles Morales, in the main story and some lab outposts, Miles would absorb new form energy and then expel it, especially in the ending where he absorbs what amounts to a bomb. And just a personal theory, but I believe that specific one must have had some type of genetic mutation within him, which allows him to use both his natural orange bioelectricity and his blue new form energy, which may serve different functions to the former. There are also some new combat moves that I noticed, like this one where you can slam enemies in the ground and they bounce back up. When you web enemies from a further distance instead of spinning them, it seems like you have more control of where you want to move them, as showcased in this clip, but take it with a grain of salt because I don't think the spinning has been fully removed. And there's this really nasty one where Peter just completely eliminates the chances of this guy having kids in the future. This move in particular is very interesting because when you look close, it doesn't seem to be a finisher because you can see the focus bar is not fully filled up, and there isn't a prompt to execute this attack. which begs the question if this game features context-sensitive attacks similar to Resident Evil 4 Remake, where if you shoot an enemy in the head you get melee prompts. And here in Spider-Man, whenever you close to a specific object, like a wall in this example, you can execute specific attacks. We'll have to wait and see until the full release, but it's an interesting thought for sure. While not necessarily a component of combat, stealth also sees some new additions. In Miles Morales, stealth was really improved because not only did you have the environmental props and takedowns, but with Miles you could turn invisible and do both wall and ceiling takedowns, which opened much of the restrictions Spider-Man PS4 had. Here in the second game, you can now create web lines, opening up new ways of allowing you to traverse through a space, and it seems you can make an infinite amount of them as the ability isn't labeled as a gadget, and also dual takedowns are now possible. Returning to the combat discussion about gadgets and abilities, the trailer also showcases how you can combine both, with Miles, for example using a web grabber gadget to pull enemies to the center, followed up by the Thunder Burst ability, a ground pound attack. Quick side note, and this is just a personal observation, but can we appreciate the influence RGG has been having in game development as a whole from what I've been seeing? If you've played any of the Yakuza games, you'll know that RGG constantly reuses assets from their previous games. This allows them to focus more on the story, gameplay mechanics and side content without having to worry about a new place, and as a result, returning towns feel more alive and almost like a second character because of the many stories that happen within them. In most modern AAA games, you can see the same thing happening with games like Tears of the Kingdom, God of War Ragnarok, and now Spider-Man 2 reusing the same locations while implementing new additions here and higher attentions to details there, which not only is a net positive for players already emotionally invested in the world, but it also helps devs having ready built assets ready to be used instead of rebooting them from scratch. Based on this trailer alone, we've already managed to extrapolate some of the big core changes and additions to the game, and we're still to learn how exploration is set up in this game. Will it be similar to the first game with its Ubisoft approach of collectibles and unlockable towers, or something new? For much of that we'll have to wait and see, and from what we could dissect today, it really feels like we are in for a solid experience in the making. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends and activate the bell so you can get notification of my latest video, and thank you for watching.